rehash recordings that you've watched before, you can go to growwithjamie.com, which is on the screen right now, and just watch back. I think this is our 6th recording, so you can watch back 6, and we've got a final masterclass coming up next month. So in this masterclass, we've got Kamiqua Lake, who is the CEO of comms and marketing agency Coldr, and she's also the founder of the UK Black Comms Network. And she'll be showing you how you can use PR for really effective brand awareness and just to incorporate it into your growth strategy as a small business. So enough from me. Take it away, Cam.
Oh, thank you for such a lovely welcome, Courtney. Hi, everyone. I am going to take us through some slides. I'm going to be encouraging a little bit of participation, just so I can get to know you a little bit more and your businesses a little bit more, because actually there are definitely some general rules of PR, but there are also some kind of specific, depending on what industry you're in or what product or service you offer, whether you're more B2B or business to consumer. So yeah, please feel free to share and talk as you go along. So let me kick straight off into today's plan. But I've got an agenda here, and we'll try and get through all of these 6 points. The first part is just really understanding your audience, which I think for any sort of marketing plan, PR is part of the overall marketing mix, that you've got to start with really understanding your audience. Then we'll talk a little bit more about what PR actually is. We'll talk a bit more about PR as part of an integrated approach to reaching your customers or your audiences. We'll talk about the power of PR, and we'll share some examples of some campaigns. We'll then also talk a little bit more about influencer campaigns, and then lastly finish with hopefully some inspiration just based on some big brand campaigns, but also smaller brands and smaller businesses that have really used PR to their advantage. So first of all, the first question I always ask whenever we get a briefing around PR is, who are you trying to reach? And I think if anything, I think one of the biggest takeaways from today has got to be really knowing your customers. Sometimes we assume we know them. Sometimes we started a business because our family or friends have identified a problem, or we've been in industry and we've identified a problem. But it's really important to understand who buys your product or service. Who is your customer? Are they a busy mum? Are they a young person? Are they a high net worth individual, an investor? Are they a DINK? I don't know if you guys have heard of DINKs, but it's double income young professionals who don't have any kids, retiree or young professionals. So these are just some broad groupings and customer categories that you might have. And then you might use psychographics, so really understand who they are and where they're at in life and what's important to them. So just as a using the chat box, I'd love to see how many people think they really have a good understanding of who their ideal customer is. Maybe just by saying, yes, I do, or maybe introducing yourself and saying what your business is. Because oftentimes, and even me as a kind of a marketing PR person, I have to do a lot of work to continually refine like who my audience is. Then the second part of that is around, why do they buy? So what are their pains? What are their problems? What are their issues? What are you solving for them? And what are the gains as a result of buying your product or your service? Are they doing it for convenience? Is it to increase their status? Is it to look good? Is it to feel better? Is it to just generally make their life easier? Why? What's the reason? Have you got a really clear idea of your customer segmentation? And then the third part is like, when and how do they buy? So what are the specific behaviors that you want to influence? Do you want to help them understand your product better? Is it a beauty product or a food product with complicated ingredients, and you really want to help them understand exactly what that product is about and why it might help them? Are they the type of person who really looks for that recommendation in store or when you're at a pop-up and they're looking for more information? Is that when people really have the impetus to buy? Is it from friends and word of mouth? Is it from endorsement from their favorite influencers? Do you think they're the type of person or type of kind of audience or community that really buys into influencers? Is it by reading something in a magazine, so journalists? Are they more likely to be a kind of pop-up or in-store buyer or an online buyer? And are they more likely to buy after reading an article in a national newspaper or magazine? or their social. So oftentimes, you know, we know that not many people, not many people, lots of people still do read national or traditional media, you know, your Guardian or Telegraph, the Times. But I think oftentimes where we are now is that a lot of people follow their favorite kind of news outlets on social, whether that might be a Stylist magazine or a Vogue magazine, or whether that might be BBC News or ITV News. So whilst reading a newspaper or purchasing a newspaper might not be as common for depending on your audience, actually, because older audiences are still very much into traditional media. There are other ways that I think sort of media and having a PR approach to your comms are still going to be really important. The other thing I would say is that if your product is aimed at Black communities or South Asian or minority communities, whilst oftentimes these communities might not necessarily pick up a paper, I do think when we see stories that we like, we share them in the WhatsApp group and we'll share a link to an article. So there again, while saying that actually people are not reading newspapers that often, traditional media still has a part to play in how people decide what products they like, what services they like, what's important to them. So it shouldn't be missed off of your kind of thinking when you're planning your marketing. Now, what is PR? I think this is the question that I get asked most because a lot of people don't really understand what PR is. They think it's something to do with publicity, but not exactly sure what it is and how it works. Some people think it's all about spin and getting people or brands out of problems. But I just wondered if anyone feels happy to share in the chat what they think PR is. And I'll give you a minute or so to have a little think. Particularly if anyone's already dabbled in doing some PR for their business. Love to hear your thoughts. Yeah, helping brand awareness with press. Any other thoughts, definitions? Okay, got a bit of a shy bunch. We'll go on to some of the definitions that I think work quite well. So there are lots of different definitions for PR. I think the ones that I quite like, I've highlighted here. So yeah, managing how information on a brand is shared, absolutely. How the audience views your business and how you communicate your brand to consumers, absolutely. How public relations is primarily about your reputation. It's the result of what you do, what you say you do, and what others say you do. So whereas advertising really just tells someone what your brand is. So if you've got a billboard ad, you know, if you're doing some paid advertising, you know, that's where you're saying, this is my product, this is what it does, and this is what's great for you. Public relations is the art of finding out the circle of influence around your audience. So how is your audience influenced to buy or to do whatever you might want them to do as part of the service that you offer? So public relations, if I take this Chartered Institute of PR, which is one of our kind of industry bodies, definition of it, it's about reputation. It's about the discipline that looks after reputation and earning an understanding and support on an opinion and behavior. It's planned, so it's not a one-stop, you know, it's not a one-off thing that you do. You've got to have a really sustained kind of strategy and approach to it. And it's also, oh, my slide just slipped there. It's also about building that kind of goodwill and mutual understanding between an organization and its publics. Who are our publics? Our audiences or our customers. Forbes uses an example where they talk about earned media. So if you hear the term earned media, it's the same as PR. And all it's saying is that we earn the attention. We're not paying for people's attention to look at our product. We earn it via the different ways that we're trying to reach the people we're trying to reach. So in this style of marketing, you must persuade outside forces, such as other companies, to spread your message. Typically, this is found in traditional media marketing. You try to convince a publisher, so you might a magazine or a newspaper, or another party to really headline your content. And basically, you're using outside forces to push your content towards a particular audience. So it's not just you saying you're great, it's other people saying you're great. I think the other example that I really like is from the PR and Communications Association, which is another industry body, which essentially talks to PR is all about the way an organization communicate with the public, promote themselves, and build a positive reputation and public image. The way an organization is represented in the media has a huge impact on how people perceive it. PR professionals try to influence the media to represent their organization positively and communicate key messages. So one of the kind of key words I think that we're seeing there is all around that positivity piece, around maintaining reputation, around communicating to different audiences. And if you keep that front and center, that is the essence of PR. But there's a reason why you can find PR quite confusing. And I'm hoping by the end of this session, it should be more clear. And the reason why PR can be really confusing is this is a diagram called the Peso model. Peso stands for paid, earned, owned, and shared. So it's a model that we use in marketing, but you often hear PR people talk a lot about it. And PR or earned media, essentially PR sits in the earned media. So that is anything that is liaising with the media, liaising with influencers, investors, bloggers, anything word of mouth is earned media. So if you work with a PR company, you might be paying that PR company. The PR company isn't paying the journalist to write about your product. So they've got a relationship, they've got a contact, they've got a network. They're earning the right to have to cover your brand rather than being paid to do so. Shared media is where you might do any community work. So it's where you build your brand ambassadors, your advocates, it's all your community building work, any partnerships that you might do where you're sharing media. Owned media tends to be what you own as a brand. So that might be your website, so all of your owned channels that you might have, any videos or content that you create that you own, your employer stories, your customer stories, you own those things. And then paid is, I guess, does what it says on the tin, but that's any of your lead generation work. So if you do paid email marketing, if you do search engine optimization, if you pay for social media ads. And so whilst PR traditionally only sits in the earned media space, so where we don't pay the people that we're talking to. So if we do a community event, we're not necessarily paying people to attend. It's become more and more blurred as the years have gone on. And oftentimes PR and marketing agencies or PR agencies can offer some paid services. They can offer some shared services in terms of helping you find brand ambassadors. And they can also use some of your owned media kind of entities or assets, so your employer stories, your customer stories to tell stories. So it can get really blurred. But I think the main point to understand is that PR is part of a broader marketing mix. It can work great by itself, but actually the power of PR is often lies in having a more integrated approach to how in terms of your overall approach to marketing. And so that's why it comes back to really understanding your customer, understanding how you can reach them, and can you do that through an earned approach, or can you do that through a paid approach or owned approach? I mean, oftentimes it's quite difficult to reach people just by having a website unless you've got some good kind of SEO around it. So you normally need some paid. And increasingly earned and shared, there's a really blurred line. So the key point to land on this slide is really just there are lots of different ways to reach your customer to grow your business. PR is one part of that, but it's worth considering other parts of that, or how you can build a plan that is integrated. So there's lots of different ways to reach your customer. And I just thought I'd share some examples of some campaigns we've done at Coldr, because I think some of the best ways to understand how PR can work and how it can help you as a business is by seeing other campaigns. So there's quite a few case studies throughout this proposal today. So one of the things that I think PR can be great for is building communities. I don't know if anybody has seen, but increasingly bigger beauty brands, food brands are not just leaning on kind of influencer marketing techniques, taking influencers on trips or giving freebies to influencers. They're increasingly building their communities online and offline, and then treating those communities to moments. that are really important to them. So Refi, one beauty brand, Tarte, some of the bigger beauty brands, they're increasingly doing moments where they're inviting their customers to be part of their story. And I'll come on to a bit more around why kind of more community marketing is really important, but PR can play a really great role in helping build the story and build the narrative around hope having these moments. And actually, even if you're a service business, as we are, it's still really important to us. So we're a B2B business. We sell to, you know, brands, and we try to encourage brands to work with us. And the first picture around the Ivy International Women's Day was an event that we held at the Ivy for clients and clients that we were looking to work with. And it was an opportunity to build conversations and tell them a bit more about what we do without telling them what we do, essentially. So creating a moment. PR can really help to drive change. And actually, one of the big campaigns we worked on this year was around holding up a mirror to cricket. So it was all about trying to change the laws or change the way cricket, the game, is played, make it more an inclusive sport. And actually, this is an example. If you're sort of a charity organization or you're someone that's campaigning, PR alone can be really, really powerful if you've got really strong stories to tell. And this campaign got about 3,000 pieces of coverage. It was all over the news, and actually, more crucially, what it helped to do was change the game of cricket, so make cricket a more inclusive sport. PR can really help you tap into culture authentically. So if you're a brand that's really led by culture, you know, whether you're a drinks brand, a food brand, you could be a hair or beauty brand, you know, working with a PR company to help you carve out the messaging and stories, but create a moment for your audience, it can be really powerful. Also, PR is also about driving awareness. So I was just saying to the Jammy team before this call that oftentimes, you know, we might have come across brands who want to do PR, and they're like, we've done some PR and it didn't really work for us. And I'll say, oh, so what happened? Why didn't it work? And they would say, we got loads and loads of coverage, but it didn't help us shift product, or it didn't really help to drive sales. And what I would say is that it's really important to understand what type of product you're selling or service you're selling, and whether it is the kind of product where just by reading about it, people want to buy it. And by that, I mean that you can drive a lot of awareness with PR. You know, if you target the right titles, the right journalists, and also with influencer marketing, you can get the right people interested. But if you think back to even maybe one of the last things that you bought, the rule of thumb generally we say in advertising is you need to see something at least 7 times in different ways before you're really convinced to buy something. So you might hear somebody talk about it, a friend might mention it to you, you might read about it, or it's featured in a magazine. But you need to see that brand in lots of different ways for a lot of time. So where PR can help with, it can help with the awareness piece, but you need to make sure you're also thinking about other things to drive eyeballs to your product and drive sales. PR is really powerful in creating hype and buzz. And oftentimes, I think, in terms of small businesses, if you've got a new product launch, you know, as I've got here with also like March Muses, who's the Christmas decoration brand who we worked with a couple of years ago, it can really help to drive hype and buzz, but you really need to have a really strong story to tell, which I'll come on a bit more to. Again, it can help you with raising awareness, and it's really good if you've got a campaign or an issue that's really important to you. So what you'll find is, even if it's a brand, so I don't know how many of you have heard of Wooker, who sell period underwear, for example, and they do a lot of comms, a lot of PR. They're in all of the magazines and all of the nationals, talk, you know, really flying the flag for period underwear, getting women to think about that time of the month differently. But actually for them, one of the things that's really helped them to gain more traction and more sales and be more relevant is partnering with Marks and Spencer's on a campaign to reduce the tax on period products. So whilst the campaign might not seem the obvious thing for you, there might be something in and around your brand that you've created where actually you want to campaign for change, which could have a really strong halo effect on sales, but also on your brand awareness. So really do think about more broadly about how you might tell different stories that are related to your product or brand or service. So to pique journalists' interest, what are the types of things that journalists are interested in? They can be interested in data and survey stories. But oftentimes not just your own data. So if you've got customer data, great, but they normally want data that kind of just relates to how their readers or how their audiences think, feel, love, play, like what do they do in their spare time? Why is this product important? So customer data can help, but I think it's really thinking about going back to what do your audience care about? Because ultimately, journalists or newspapers are trying to shift copies and they're trying to appeal to their audiences. And so you've got to really understand what makes a Telegraph reader, you know, what are they interested in versus a Cosmopolitan or a Glamour reader, what are they interested in versus a trade title, what are they interested in? And so it's, as a PR person, our job is to be the broker between understanding your brand and then understanding what the journalists are into and creating a story that fits their readers, that is really kind of, that has your brand front and center. So they're really interested in survey stories, social media trends. If you've got a brand that is basically an e-commerce brand, you do a lot around social media and influencer marketing, think about what trends you're starting. You know, it's oftentimes we can get really caught up on people, you know, other brands copying us or bigger brands, you know, bigger brands sort of stealing a bit of our fire. But also those kinds of things can be news stories. Don't know if you saw Kai Collective a couple of years ago, had a story around Boohoo and the fact that Boohoo were you know, copying some of their designs. All of these things, sometimes which can feel quite challenging or negative, can actually be PR stories that journalists could be interested in. But as well as if you've got a product that's sold out really quickly, if you're the type of founder that really leans on your founder story and you've got some interesting stories to tell from that perspective, journalists are interested in those stories too. They really want campaigns their readers can get behind. So you need to really understand, again, the audience, your audience, what do they read? And then what is a campaign that a journalist might be really interested in? They like quirky stories. They like exclusives. They also like stories that that's only for them. Business wins and success stories and launches of innovative products and services. But when you're talking about launches of innovative products and services, it's not just I've launched this product. It's like, what problem does this product solve? Why is it interesting to their readers? And those are the things to really keep front and center. So what are the different types of things you might have if you've got a PR person, or you might be thinking about doing PR yourself if you've got time to do it as a business owner? So I think PR can really help with just general strategic counsel and advisory. I think oftentimes one of the key things is understanding when's the right time to switch on a PR campaign or switch on marketing. Sometimes I've spoken to different types of businesses and actually they're still in the strategy phase of working out their business and what it is they want to do and who their customers are. And actually PR is so much better once you've figured those things out. So I would say don't do it too soon. Do it once you really have a good understanding of your audience and you think actually that extra awareness can be helpful. And I think oftentimes PR professionals can help you work that out, because sometimes your business objectives can be different to your communications objectives. And I'll come on to talk a bit more about that as we go through. Media relations is the obvious one. So PR professionals have relationships with journalists and media outlets that can help you to secure positive coverage. Equally, when things go wrong, and as you become, you know, bigger brands, things can go wrong sometimes. PRs can really help manage reputation. So managing communications or stopping stories get out that you don't want out, or sometimes when you just have challenges in team, you know, if there's a, you know, if your founding team changes and that's going to have a big impact, for example, and you might want to think about how you're not only going to message that to your kind of key stakeholders or your board or your investors, but you might also be thinking, how am I going to message this on social media? And that's where a PR team can be really helpful in making sure you land that messaging in a way that is, you know, not just business speak, puts your customer first, but also relays the facts. And I think that's oftentimes where I think small businesses really find PR consultancy really valuable. In more corporate communication, so again, really understanding your audiences. Some of you may be more focused on consumer audiences. Some of you may be focused on getting listings. So you're more focused on your trade audiences and buyers, or C-suites in certain kind of businesses or organizations. But I think PR can really help with understanding who are those audiences and what do you need to say to them. Reputation management, which I've talked quite a lot about. Publicity and promotion, so events, creating moments for your products and your services through various different channels. Influencer marketing, which there are specialist influencer marketing agencies, but also often PR agencies. It's all kind of in the same vein, can support with that. Community building and relations. So if you're the type of brand where, you know, beauty brands, all different types, even food brands, for example, I think everybody can create a bit of a community around their brand. And I think PR can help with not only getting the right people in a room, but also how do you make the most of getting the right people in the room? How do you make sure it's not just about that event that you've held and you're not just sharing it on social media? How can you expand that so more people hear about what you're doing? Events, which I've talked about. I think events work really well for media and influencer kind of launches, product launches, but helping you find the right people who have influence, who can help you with growing your brand. Stunts, which I don't think small businesses use as much as they could, but having a planned event or action that generates a bit of public awareness and then is therefore covered in the media. And then award entry programs. I think we've seen a lot of it in Black History Month in terms of people entering awards. But I would say that big brands, individuals and small brands do this, and it can work really well. So not just with you've probably seen all of the kind of coverage around Dean Forbes topping the power list, and that being a real kind of PR opportunity for him and the Forbes family group. So absolutely, there's kind of bigger programs, but even companies like we've worked recently with Somerset House, for example, and they were keen to gain some traction around some of the work they're doing. So again, PR professionals can really help you with crafting an award entry. If you think you've got a nugget of something there that you've done really well, that is really interesting, and a lot of awards are free, really consider if you can, and this again is something you can work with a PR professional or you can do yourself, but really consider entering these because they can provide opportunities for you to get media coverage too. And then how do you use PR to reach your audience? So the first thing is really understanding where are your audience. So oftentimes I find with like SMEs, they tend to focus on one or other type media rather than thinking about everything holistically. So sometimes you find kind of really high growth startups really focus on trade media. So brands that are really focused on getting listings or, you know, getting into bigger retailers, for example, really focus on the trades. I also think service businesses really focus on the trades, and I think actually it works really well. You have to, because if you're a B2B business and you need other, you know, brands or businesses to see you, they are often reading trade media. So really working out whether trade media needs to be a focus for you and then what stories you need to tell. National and mainstream media, again, are really key. You know, the BBC, Sky News, those websites are still the most highest read websites in the UK. And, you know, they have so many regional options as well as national options. So whether it's your BBC London's, your BBC Birmingham, but also your kind of the national BBC, really, really important. So yeah, think about the stories you want to tell there. I think they're quite interested in case study-led stories, in first-person stories, as well as your kind of business-led stories or product stories. And then don't forget about specialist media. It's, you know, that specialist media could be anything from, you know, the likes of The Voice or Eastern Eye, so that focus on different audiences, right through to magazines like Attitude that focus on LGBT audiences. And oftentimes, depending on the story, it can be easier to get into. Not easier, but you can be if you've got a really focused story that makes sense for their readership, it can be an easier one to get into. You just have to be mindful that they're often smaller teams, so it can take a little bit longer for your story to land. I think the other type of media, which I haven't necessarily got on here, which is really important that people overlook, is regional media. A lot of people still read their local papers or tap into their local news or follow their local kind of magazine or local newspaper on social media. And, you know, the My Londons, but also just, you know, the Yorkshire Evening Post, so outside of London too. Don't neglect those audiences because actually they're really well read and can be really crucial in terms of your PR approach. So I wanted to do a quick spotlight on March Muses. Actually, this was before we worked with them. So for those of you that don't know, March Muses are Christmas decorations of colour, and they have a great range of products. I've got a black Santa myself. And it was founded by Natalie Deval and Alison Burton. And I think they use PR really smartly to sell out of their kind of initial range. So, and this was before actually Dragon's Den, if I remember correctly, but doing a combination of sending out the product to the right influencers within the kind of community. Really, again, not just saying that they've launched decorations, but saying why they've launched these decorations. So for a more inclusive Christmas. So it's really just thinking about telling a story. They told personal stories about their family. So some of the key imagery and assets that they had with the story was about them and their family. I think sometimes that can feel quite nerve-wracking and scary. You can feel a little bit exposed by PR, but the reality is this is what media need to write the story. So if you've got a brand that is centered around family, it's those kinds of stories that the media are going to really want to tell. But this was also coupled, which I haven't got on here, with them doing their own personal PR. And I think that's one thing that's often really overlooked. As small business owners, we tend to be really, really busy, but the power of things like LinkedIn in telling stories, getting people to rally behind you, building your community are also equally important. It can also help with just finding the right contacts at each magazine or newspaper. So again, a really just smart case study where they really just use PR and influencer to sell out of their entire range. And then after their Dragon's Den, they went on Dragon's Den, which did really well for them, and they got their funding. They've used PR again, and I think this is an example. If you've got a seasonal product, I think some of the things that people often do is wait till the wrong time. So if you've got a seasonal product, say it is Christmas, like March Muses, a lot of the big brands start their like PR outreach. So start speaking to journalists and influencers as early as July. Because actually a lot of the magazines have a really long lead time of 3 to 6 months. So they need to see the products or know what you're going to do, or you need to have your range ready for those journalists as early as July before Christmas time. And sometimes I've often had people come to us in December and say, we've got a Christmas range, and it just doesn't allow enough time. So if you've got a seasonal product, I'd say definitely work back around 6 months in terms of engaging media in your brand. So just to summarize, it's really important to know your audience. You need to understand how your brand behaves in culture. How do people use your product? What is it important for them? Why do they use it? Because that will give you a really good creative idea that you might be able to use in PR. Really tell stories, not facts. PR is all about storytelling. Facts are great to back up and have proof points, but it's really about that. My job is really about problem solving and telling stories. And those problems could be anything from we're not selling enough product, or this is our target audience, but they're not interested in it, or we had a really great first quarter, but we're not doing so well now. What can we do? So it's really about problem solving and telling stories to reach target audiences. Tailor your story to the journalist. So we haven't talked so much about that yet, but there are so many different, actually the journalist community is dwindling. It's getting smaller and smaller all of the time. But if you are an e-commerce brand, you want to seek out the e-commerce editor, or if you're a retail brand, you want to seek out the shopping editor of a magazine. If it's more of a community or a campaign, you want to seek out the kind of community correspondence or social affairs correspondence for a story. If you're more of a founder-led brand, you really want to seek out those kind of business sections of the paper. So it really is important to not just have one story to tell. You've got to tweak your story depending on who you're trying to speak to. And then lastly, develop a media pack. I think oftentimes you never know who's watching. And actually, one of my friends runs a CMOS business. And, CMOS it has become really popular over the last kind of few years. And they recently got an inquiry from the Daily Mail who wanted to do a piece on the 5 top CMOSs that you need. And it was a bit of a rush to get assets together. So having some nice photography, having some key messaging together, having the press release together. So I would say, even if you can't do the full works, have a kind of broad media pack, which includes some key information about your brand, some key images that you're happy with, so you're good to go. Because oftentimes you can miss an opportunity when a journalist contacts you just because you're not prepared. In terms of working with a professional, I thought I'd just put a few tips in here. I think the main thing is really having a clear brief. What is the problem you're trying to solve? And who are you trying to reach? And I think any good PR professional will really unpick that and help you understand whether PR is the right thing you need to do now, or whether it's something else you need to do. Because no PR is in the business of well, I'm not saying there might be some, but I think generally no PR is in the job of just just taking your money and not doing a good job. I think it's about being really clear on what does success look like for you, which is my third point. I think the second point is really around experience and engagement. Like, what experience do you have in your particular industry, or in the products you're trying to sell, or in the stories you want to tell? And can you work with them? Because, you know, there's going to be moments where things work, sometimes things won't work. But you need to be able to have those open conversations and open communication. So getting on with them is really important. And this is whether you're a small brand or big brand. All of the big brands often have like chemistry sessions with PR agencies before they even start working with them. So yeah, it's really, really important. And then, as I've said earlier, like, what does success look like for you? You need to be clear in your mind in that the PR won't write the brief for you. You need to write that brief. But actually, if you really need help just working out the brief, PR professional can help you with that too. And I love this statement that a brief is a check that will be cashed. Like, your PR campaign or your marketing campaign is only as good as the brief you prepared. And oftentimes, to that story that I told earlier, as a PR person, you can hit the KPIs in terms of you can achieve, you know, 20 pieces of coverage or 30 pieces of coverage. But if coverage isn't going to be the thing that really helps you achieve your goals, whether that's drive awareness or drive trust in your product or drive sales or explain what your product is, it's almost useless. So a really good brief should have your business objectives. What are you actually trying to achieve? And an overview of your business. Where do you want it to be? Who are your key audiences, and any insights you have on them? That might be customer data in terms of how often they shop, for example, or what types of content have you tried before, what's worked well, or what stories have you done PR before? Who are your key competitors? And a really good understanding of who your key competitors are. What are the issues and considerations? So, you know, give as much information as you can. It's a confidential relationship. Any relevant market research or background information that you have, any other marketing activity that you're planning at the same time or before or after, what's the time frame, and also what's the budget. And I think if your brief is thoughtful enough to include all of these elements, you'll be closer to getting a PR campaign that really works for you. So moving on to influencer campaigns, I'm just going to touch on this briefly because I'm aware of time. I think the main thing to really understand in this space is really understanding the different types of influencers. I mean, Sprout Social, if anyone does not use it, is really great for loads of insights. So I definitely recommend checking them out. But there are 4 types of influencers. So you've got your nano influencers, your micro influencers, your macro influencers, and your mega influencers. So Beyonce might be an example of a mega influencer. You've got your macro influencers, it might be someone like a Patricia Bright. Then you've got your micro influencers, which again, actually, I think Zizi's got a bit more, but maybe a Zizi Mills. And then you've got like a nano influencer who's got less than 10K. And actually what you find, particularly, I think, depending on what your type of business you have, the nano influencers can be really strong route to go down because they tend to have super engaged audiences, and they also don't cost the earth to work with. So don't underestimate nano influencers. But I would also say the main thing you want to understand is who their audience is. Like, just because you follow them, sometimes we follow influencers or follow brands that we never shop from. So it's not just about the fact that they have the followers. It has to be about how do their followers engage? Do they stand for something? Do they promote any product, or are they really specific in the types of products that they promote? These are really important questions to ask yourself when you're thinking about who to work with from an influence perspective. It sounds really obvious, but even when working with big brands, they can fall into this trap too of working with your kind of mega influencers, but not getting that much return on their investment. So it's a lesson for all. And in terms of really making the most of an influencer campaign, you have to set a goal. Again, what does good look like? Really consider reach over engagement. If you're just looking for broad reach, fine, but oftentimes broad reach without any considerations around how engaged people are over the content they create is a recipe for a disaster. Do background checks. I think influencers, sometimes you can do as much. Before we work with any influencers, and before big brands work with any influencers, they'll do a check of them. What have they talked about before? What are some of the rumors or whispers around a particular influencer? What could the risks be? And it's really important to understand these things, because you don't want to be related to someone who could, you can't be prepared for everything, but make sure you're thinking about that, but someone that could damage your brand. And make sure when you're creating contracts of influencers, which I hope everybody does when they are working with influencers, and not just reaching out to people on social and saying, will you promote my brand? Make sure you've got some sort of recourse in there that supports you if should they do something that you're no longer happy with. But I think the rule of thumb here is to have contracts in place so that everybody's agreed with what the kind of deliverables are, but also, how you're going to manage that campaign. Foster collaboration and creativity. I think it's really important to allow influencers to do their thing. They know what works for their audience. And sometimes you not know what you want to say. And I think working together collaboratively is what produces the content that people really love. And then lastly, as I say, set KPIs and then test and retest. So how did that campaign work? How did that campaign work for you? Have you got the really specific KPIs? Does it need to pull in a certain number of leads or a certain number of hits to your website or drive a certain number of sales? I think be really clear on what you want to achieve with influencer marketing. And then lastly, onto the inspiration box. I just thought I'd share a couple of campaigns. I can send the links around to this so you can have a look at them. This is a slightly odd one, but I don't know if anybody knows of Blue, who basically are kind of the capsules for your toilet. They won an award recently for their campaign. And what I loved about it was they worked with a couple of influencers. I don't know if you know Teresa and Cal. Ryan, but they're some TikTokers. Actually, I think Teresa's quite big on Instagram too. And they did a tour basically of the loos across the UK to mark them as the best, from best to worst loos. So just really kind of fun content. Obviously, they're slightly, they've got a good following. So I think they're in the kind of macro influencer space. But I think what's interesting here, and to that point around using PR and influencer together in an integrated way, they also, the brand also put out a survey which really talked about, what are the worst things about using public toilets. And then in the coverage, there was also some coverage around the kind of TikTok stars going on this tour. So when you're building a story, think about all the different elements of it. So for Blue, they're launching their new Spa Moments product. Not that interesting by itself. It's just a new product. And fine, if they just want trade PR and they just want their retailers to know, they could just go out of a press release that said, we're launching a new product. But actually, to get people talking, partnering with influencers was really key. This content did really well. And then to get the PR coverage, they created a survey. So they worked with a survey company, I would imagine here, to understand what Brits think about using public toilets. And building a campaign in this way is what works really well, because you're covering different bases. People will be reading about the brand in different ways. Similarly, I think Topicals did a great job earlier in the year in terms of really, again, if you're an e-commerce brand that does really well on social, media love to cover kind of social trends. So if you have noticed a really big moment on social media, creating that story and talking to media or talking to journalists about it, they're always interested in. So Grazia led with It's All Over TikTok right now when talking about Topicals. But then equally, they did founder stories. So, thinking about actually how the founder was really interested in breaking into the UK market, sending products to journalists, doing sampling is really, really important, but then also influencer trips. So having a holistic way is the way you kind of not go viral, but it's how you really create that hype and buzz around your product to really drive those kind of growth moments for your brand or company. This I just put in, and I'm aware of time. I'll talk to this one because this is Aldi, and Aldi also always do really fun stuff with their PR. Some of it expensive, some of it low cost. But if anybody saw this campaign, they essentially just hired a Kate Moss lookalike during Chanel's show in Manchester, and with some fake paparazzi, created the pictures and then sent them into, and then there was a bit of a social media frenzy, and then media picked up on it. And I just thought, how many times as small brands do we think of things like this? Actually, a lookalike can be a fraction of the cost of an actual influencer or an actual celebrity. And you can create really good kind of social content around moments like this, if it feels right. So obviously the reason why this worked was because Chanel was having a show in Manchester, and this the fake Kate Moss was shopping in an Aldi in Manchester. So it built the story. So it wouldn't have worked if she was just in London. Nobody would have cared. So you've got to think about how it works. But there's lots of different ways that you could think creatively about gaining some traction. I thought I'd quickly talk to Flake Bake, because I think PR has been really integral to their success, not just from the show itself in terms of being on the show on Channel 4, but I think that Mike and the team are doing a really good job of telling their stories on LinkedIn. So again, really important to make sure you don't neglect your own personal PR or your business owner story within the story. Having stories for the grocer, so having a trade story, which is really important in terms of we're now listed, but then also put in different moments where they can tell their story. So actually when they sold out, we might have seen that story on social media from Mike telling the story, but they also sold that in. So they also sent that story out to journalists. And then you can see the story here: grab a bag, I grabbed a dozen, Aldi shoppers rushed to buy the viral snack. So thinking about all the different moments, even if you're in the height of getting a bit of traction, where there's another story to tell there, and then not neglecting your specialist media like The Voice, who really want to tell that story well and give you that traction. So a really good example to follow. And I think the last thing to say is that I think in terms of the future of an integrated approach, building your community has got to be one of the most important ways. Not only does it help reduce your kind of paid media spend, it's not only do media cover kind of customer-led stories, but it really helps to, as I come on to here, it really helps you to sell directly to a community. So I'd say even if you don't necessarily look at your brand or service as a community-led brand, it's really important to think about how you can build that offline as well as online community, and then use PR and marketing to really kind of deepen that kind of customer loyalty and retention. I will leave it there for now, and I don't know if anybody has any questions.
That was amazing. That was Cam, that was so insightful, so many nuggets of wisdom. Yeah, I've got a few questions, but guys, start putting your questions in the chat, because we've got about 10 minutes of Q&A now, and I'm happy to start us off. So yeah, you came with so much knowledge there, and I just had a few questions about. So first of all, you mentioned national media, so like BBC, for example, being featured in BBC is huge. But for a brand, let's say an e-commerce brand, what kind of return would you actually expect from that kind of media?
I think it depends what story you're telling. So if you're getting in the BBC telling like a founder story, which I think like Flake Bake did, it's part of the mix. I wouldn't say necessarily, because a lot of these websites, like the BBC Sky News, they don't do live links or like backlinks to your product, so people can't click directly to your product as a result. So I wouldn't say they tend to work, but oftentimes things like This Morning, that audience, getting broadcast like media coverage can be amazing and really help you sell out. So I would say some of the daytime TV that we think we don't necessarily watch, but they've got a really strong audience who are really engaged. Like if the presenter says, buy this, do this, or it gets a good review, or people are saying it's great, it works. Things like The One Show. So a lot of these kind of shows and TV programs can really support. Also radio, I think, is often underestimated. And can really help to drive sales. Again, if you've got your whole marketing mix switched on. I think it doesn't work if it's the first time you're talking about it, and the only time you're talking about it. A one-off mention on a radio show is probably not going to help. I think broadcast is the only time where it can help as a one-off moment.
Nana says, how do you ensure inclusivity within the PR process?
I mean, it's a big one. We're really big on that at Coldr. I think the key thing is who you work with. Not all, some PR agencies are more switched on, or influencer marketing agencies are more switched on to this than others. So I'd say definitely interrogate their credentials. I think it's really important that you, it's about how you approach your planning and how you approach your kind of activation. So for us, how we make sure we're really inclusive is we'll be thinking about who we work with behind the scenes. So if we're working on a brand that is really important for women, we might work with a production team that's women-led. We might invite, stories from women if we're working on stories around Black communities, So it's about the planning side, but then it's also about the activation side. The only one watch out I would say around inclusivity is making sure that AI, I think people think can be a bit of a shorthand for making campaigns look inclusive, or, and you can make, even if you couldn't afford all different types of models for a shoot you were doing, for example. And I think it's really important to not use AI in that way because it tends to go down wrong. So I think the main point is to think inclusively all the way throughout your approach. How can you make sure you're representing different stories? And the example I'd give is actually Scottish Widows, the campaign I showed earlier, which was around driving awareness of women in retirement, was really about speaking to Black and South Asian women about retirement, but not just speaking to them in the same way we speak to everybody else. It was finding stories that really relate to South Asian communities and Black communities. So, not asking our survey questions to those communities, having focus groups with those communities so that the story really landed well and didn't char.
That was a lovely answer. Umatoni says, I have an e-commerce jewelry brand and will be getting someone to help internally with PR. Do you recommend setting up a press at email address?
Yeah, I think it can be helpful, but I think don't worry too much about it. Journalists will contact you whichever way they need to contact you, as long as you're listing it out. I think it's more if you're planning a big campaign and it's going to kind of eat up your inbox to have, if you need the kind of distinction, then I would definitely say a separate inbox is better. And definitely as you grow, if you're quite a big jewelry brand, I'd say the separation really does help. But if you're just starting out and you're testing the waters, generally, if it's an info address, journalists are quite happy to contact that. They're not fussed. It's more around just getting the information.
Mm-hmm. She also asked, is there a general template or format you recommend when reaching out to journalists? So like,
the press release, the press release is the standard format, which I think I've seen really good press releases and really bad press releases. I think the key thing with a press release is to keep it really short and sharp. Have a really catchy headline. What is the story? Make sure you get that across straight away. So sometimes journalists get hundreds of emails every day. So when you're emailing them out the kind of story, you want a really catchy subject header that gets straight to the point. So I might say news for your paper tomorrow, XXX, like what's the story, and hoping to grab their attention. And then the first paragraph has to get straight to the point. So don't introduce yourself, I'm the founder. They don't care about all of that. That can all come later. Go straight to the point with why this is going to be interesting for their readers. And then you back it up at the end with who you are, why it's important, and if they want any, what you've got to offer them. So have you got an asset? Have you got pictures? Have you got video? Have you got a case study, so someone who loves your brand to share with them? Really put yourselves in the shoe of the journalist and what they want, because they're there to make sure their story resonates with their readers. So it's not you first, it's story first.
Screen Nation says, how do you use a well-known founder or CEO succession story to refresh and rebrand to deliver new services?
I just want to understand exactly what you mean. Do you mean in terms of you're an existing brand that everybody knows and you want to do a refresh? Just if you can clarify exactly what you mean by that question.
I think that's the question. So like if you're rebranding, how would you package that to make sure it's exciting?
Okay.
Is that your question?
Yeah. Yeah, if that's the case, I would say that, sometimes it can be really scary if you're kind of a brand that you feel like you've been around for a long time and nobody cares. But if you think about some of the brands we know and love, they've been around for absolute years. So it's more about just injecting some energy and some freshness into your marketing approach. So doing something a little bit differently. And that's why I had the example of Blue there. they, you know, they're not a new brand. They're not something that we haven't heard of before. So they've got to find new ways to tap into an audience. So actually partnering with TikTok has really worked for them. So I think depending on what type of brand you are, just having a new approach can inject some energy into your brand.
Hannah says, what are the average costs that SMEs should factor into our budgets for PR?
I think it ranges, it depends. I'd say that an average retainer probably starts at about 2 to 3K, depending on whether if you're working with more of an agency. I'd say if you're working with a consultant, you could be looking at 250 to 500 pounds a day. So you might want to start off with a like consultant first, to support you with your kind of PR activities. But I'd say if you're working with an agency who might be able to offer you different things and have different overheads, you might be looking at, yeah, a little bit more than that.
Isla says, thank you so much for an informative and succinct presentation. Patrick says, what tools or platforms would you recommend?
So I would say, I mean, X used to be, or Twitter, like used to be really, really great for like journo requests. So the hashtag journo request really used to be really good. And I'd say that journalists still do get a lot of their stories from X. So look out for that journo request hashtag, because I think it does still exist. I think it's about, in order to understand how best to tailor your stories, you've got to read some of these papers. So even just follow them on social media. So if you don't follow BBC News or ITV News, or Sky News, or some, you know, or even they're different kind of the offshoots of that, or Vogue or Cosmo or Glamour, or depending on what your type of brand is, you're not going to get a good idea of how they're talking to their readers. So I think the best advice is to like engross yourself in the things that you think your customer reads, and then use that as a way to tell your story in a more effective way. Sometimes as business owners, we can be so swallowed up in our own worlds and just the running of the business. But I think it's really important to understand that if you're going to understand how to talk to your customer.
Mm-hmm. Jamie says, what would be the best approach for PR in the non-profit sector? Oh, sorry, I just lost that.
I would say
Jamie
that
has a CIC selling secondhand furniture, and they also provide a weekly food bank and upholstery upcycling workshops.
I mean, we're coming up to Christmas, like all of those food bank, like not-for-profit stories do really well. And actually purpose stories and campaigns do really, really well as well. So I would actually say this is the time for those kind of purpose-led stories. If you can talk about, you know, a food bank that's doing really well, or an area where you've noticed that more customers are flocking to, or maybe it's that it's a bigger challenge and you're seeing that actually, or you know, more customers are using it than ever before. So just think about the stories around, and I'm just using the feedback as an example, or food stories around your secondhand shop and furniture shop that would be really interesting at this time of year. I mean, is there something around, just riffing, but again, we all have like big, you know, if we do have big families, we're trying to invite them around Christmas, actually don't just think about buying a new sofa. Why wouldn't we consider secondhand furniture? Secondhand and circularity and sustainability are also big things that journalists and influencers like to talk about. So again, it's thinking, okay, this is my product, but what are people generally interested in? They're generally interested in sustainability. They're generally interested in convenience. They're generally interested in providing a nice experience for their family at Christmas, or they're generally interested in finding their local food bank. So how do I reach them? What are they reading? Who are they following? What are they interested in? And then that's how you build, once you've got that insight, that's how you build up that campaign. So it's just thinking about the influence around whatever your product or service is.
Mm-hmm. Just before we finish the Q&A, I just want to draw your attention to this QR code. Basically, we are collecting feedback because we are putting together some research about how sessions like these effectively support you as a Black-owned business. So please make sure that you scan the QR code, and I'm also going to put the link in the chat for you to fill in the super quick feedback form to give us your thoughts on this session and any other things that you'd like to have for future sessions. So yeah, please make sure that you fill that in, and then we can just start collecting more and more data about what Black-owned businesses like yourself need from organizations like us. But yeah, to resume, the the Q&A. Screen Nation said, we are a media production and event brand. We produce the Black BAFTAs. How do we attract a younger demographic to the brand?
I think we've spoken before, Screen Nation. But I think it's about, there's so much up and coming talent. It is a challenge in the UK, and I know Screen Nation probably has a lot of relationships with things like British Breakfast, etc., etc. But I think it's tapping into those stories and those up and coming actors in a way that feels new and different. I think oftentimes we only hear about stars once they've almost made it, but we don't hear about them before. And I think you could own a space around telling those stories before people make it, or who are the next, almost that stars of tomorrow type energy could be really interesting. So it's almost finding, I mean, in PR, we always say the white space, but finding the space. What are the stories that are not currently being told? How could your brand or organization tell that story? Who do you need to help you tell that story so it's authentic and interesting? Is the way to go about how to, I think, engage in your audience. I think also this point around kind of Africa presents a good opportunity, completely agree. I think Africa and also the Caribbean to a degree, there could be some really interesting opportunities. So maybe you might tell some more stories around either diasporic stories or just stories that are happening outside of the UK that are not reaching the diaspora community. So I think it's about thinking about, what is your audience really interested in? Are you targeting an audience who want to get into film, or are you targeting an audience that are kind of aficionados and just love film? So getting really clear on your audience, and then what are the stories left to tell is a way to approach it.
Amazing. I hope that was useful to you. Green Nation said, thank you, you're the best. Abisola said, really great and insightful session. Thank you. Lola said this was amazing. Thank you. Umitoni said this was a great session. So yeah, thank you so much, Cam. I feel the same. It was an incredible session. So much wisdom that you shared with us. Guys, if you haven't just had a chance just yet to click the link or scan the QR code, we really appreciate your feedback. And I'm not sure if I mentioned, this session has been recorded. So if you miss anything or just want to rehash anything, you can go to growwithjamie.com. We'll be uploading this video probably tomorrow or later this week. So you'll have it just kind of to revisit. Thank you so much for